How's it going, guys? Matt here from Code Tech Tutorials. We're going to look at the controller design pattern. This is a behavioral design that you can add to your code, and you will see kind of how it goes. This is often called a mediator or an intermediary or something like that. But basically, it's where you have a bunch of components talk back to a main controller. The main controller does some work as needed and updates other components and stuff like that. So the traditional example here is like an airplane and the air traffic controller, where all the airplanes, all they do is send their data to the air traffic controller, which would be like, a position, when they're going to land, that sort of stuff. And the air traffic controller controls or sends data back to the other planes as needed. So sort of that kind of setup. I'm going to show you how to do that in C++ code. So let's just dive right into it. I already recorded this episode once, and I realized at the end when I went to start editing it that my mic was not set correctly. So yeah, I just literally talked blankly into my screen for like an hour. And here we are, doing it again. Doing it for you guys. Hope you appreciate it. All right, so let's start out with some base requirements here. We're going to have, we're going to have an interface of a controller. Sometimes you call it, you can call it different things. I'm going to be calling the whole mediator thing a controller in this case, and I'm just going to be calling the things we're working on components, but those are generally whatever, something in whatever you're working on. All right. So first of all, we're just going to forward declare a base component because we're going to be working with those here. So then we're going to make a controller and just put some basic stuff in here. This is going to be an interface class here. Maybe I'll put I controller. Yeah, let's do I for interface, and it's going to have a virtual void a notify method, and this will take a base component pointer. We'll call it sender in this case, and then we need some sort of event. Now, if we're talking about airplanes, the event might be movement, or I don't know, it could be anything. I imagine you probably do an event every radar tick or something on that case. But in our case, we're just going to make it so that we can console out a string. So in our case, our event is just going to be a string, which works and equals 0. So that makes it an interface. And there we go. All right, so now we need to define what this base component is here. Let's go ahead and do that. Base component. And you'll see why we had to forward declare it. Because if we try to declare this above the controller, we're going to have a problem right here at this part where we go. We want a reference to a controller. It wouldn't know what it is yet unless we forward declared controller for, so that's why we got to do that forward declare right there. Controller, there we go. And then let's just make some base stuff here. Let's make a constructor that takes a controller interface pointer. Let's put this one member one with an underscore in front of it. Now, if you don't pass a controller here, it's just going to be null pointer. But if you do, then we'll set it up just like so. All right, and then nothing in the body there. So default construct as null pointer, or if you actually pass it one, it'll set it up right away. So we'll have a little bit of options there. All right, and then we'll have a set method here, set controller. And all this is going to do is also take the same thing. This time, no null pointer default there because you actually need one. And it's going to kind of do what you would expect. Controller equals whatever you pass in. That way you can kind of set them up on the fly or change them if you want. Maybe you want to change to a different traffic controller or something. You could do that on the components via this method. Or you can even have it, well, you'll see here, it gets pretty neat because you can even have the controller itself call this and change it to different ones if you want. But we'll be using that here shortly. All right, so now let's go ahead and make some components. We got a base component. We don't really want to instantiate this one because it's got some nice defaults. We want the set controller, but also we want our components to actually do something. So let's make them. We'll make component 1, inherit this base component, and let's see. It's already going to have all this stuff, so that's already going to be in there. But we want it to do whatever it does. So we just need to decide. In our case, just an example. Sure, we could work it up with airplanes and pass in positions and do that sort of example. And that's fine. If you want to do that as practice, awesome. But I'm just going to give you a very generic example. So we're just going to do something. This would be essentially the component doing something. Maybe it's flying forward, for example, like or takeoff or landing, or, you know, it could be anything like that. It would essentially, when you call these methods, this is when you call the notify back to the controller, which would be this method here, the sender right there. All right, so let's just say, I don't know, we can really put anything. We're just kind of spitballing here. We're just going to say fly. All right, fly is fine. Maybe component 1 actually is a plane. I don't know. I'm going to put a little C out here and just say, just so we can see it in the console, component 1 flies. Proper plural there. Wait, is that proper? Jeez, I'm so bad at English. Is it like that in this case? Because it's not actually plural. It's I'm going to call it something else just because I don't even know. All right, well, maybe we'll just make it a little, let's just word it differently for my own sake. Component 1 flies forward. There we go. Let's just word it like that. Component 1 is flying forward. All right, so what do we want to do this? We want to notify our controller of this case. So what we do is we call this notify method. So we call, let's see. So we should have a reference to this controller. We can just call it. We can just go like so and just notify. And we want to pass it, of course, a sender, which is itself. So that way it knows about this whole thing here. And then we want the event. So we'll just say flying forward. That's fine enough. You know, in theory, you can say whatever you want. You know, it depends on your events, your particular thing. Let's go ahead and get our include straightened out where we're at. Include string, include IOStream, and just solve those right there. All right, so there we go. We've got a method right there. Let's do lands or landing. And it's essentially going to be the same thing. We'll just this in here. I'm just going to change this to a simple single word here. Component 1 is landing and land. Okay, so that way we can kind of notify of the event. Notify forward, notify land. A bit generic and simple, but you know, I'm kind of keeping with the example of the airplane at least a little bit. But really, these could be anything depending on what you're doing. And if you're in a game, it could be like, I don't know, what if your component, let's say you have a component of weather and you decide it's going to start storming. So you would call storm, then you would notify the controller of storm, and then that would notify other things, like maybe other components happen to be players or something, and they would start getting wet or something, or getting cold if you're in a survival game. So it can, you know, it can essentially do all kinds of stuff eventually. And we'll get to that. We'll get a little further. Let's make another component here for another example. I'm going to actually name this component plane component. There, that way it you know, sticks on theme. Airplane component. See, there we go. Cool. Sounds good. And maybe we have another one. Yeah, sure. Let's do a weather one. Let's do weather component since we're doing examples. Just want to give you the idea that these can, you know, be anything that might have events, and we'll see how that works with the controller / mediator very soon. So we'll say storming or raining. I'll just say raining. And I'll change these here to airplane. Airplane is flying forward. Okay, airplane is landing. And, you know, you might have a bunch of others like takeoff and stuff, but I'm going to skip all that. We could go on forever if we go into that kind of detail. We'll say here weather. Maybe I should put the word component on these. I don't know, it doesn't matter. As long as it's clear in the console. You guys will probably get the point here. Weather component begins rain, sure. And then we just take the controller, notify that the weather component says rain. And, you know, we could do that with this one. Maybe we'll say sunshine. In this case, you can, you know, we'll get to this later. We'll just say sun, begin sun. All right, well, that works for now. Those are a couple sample ones we can work with here. So now let's go to the controller. This is where things get fun and interesting. So we're going to take and make an actual and a concrete interface. So class, we'll just call this, I'll just call it concrete controller, I guess, for now. I can't think of a better name, but it is some kind of controller. I guess maybe it is an air traveler. Doesn't matter, I guess. So we're going to inherit from our I controller, our interface here, and of course we're going to need some stuff. So this does need to know in one way or another about the components. So let's go ahead and put those in here. Airplane comp, call it that, and then we want the weather one. We'll just call it weather comp. Sounds good. If you have more than one, you could make these dynamic arrays or something. If you got a bunch of airplanes or, you know, stuff like that. or weathers for different areas. You could get very complicated with this. Actually, that is one of the drawbacks of this controller method, is eventually your controller can become huge and a mess and control everything, and it's just like a giant block of code. That's one of the drawbacks, but it's got some nice advantages of how you can talk to components and stuff this way. So that's where it is cool. All right, so let's go ahead and make a constructor here. Oops, and we want to take in some references to these to get everything initialized. Let's copy this down. Actually, we'll give them different names, of course, here in a second for the ones being passed in. Call this one AC, this one WC. Sounds good to me. And we can just instantiate those directly here. And then now this is where things get a little interesting. So, okay, so you set the components, but now how do the components know about the controller? Well, we have this very cool in all the components, this set controller method. So we just call that from these ones that we passed in. So we take this, we go set controller and pass it this, which is this controller here, the one we're building. So it makes it very easy to do that sort of thing. It just feels good to code this. All right, so let's set up the notify. So what happens when these methods are called and they end up calling the notify? Let's build the notify. Now this is something that they know about because it's the interface up here, and yeah, they should have it set up now based on this constructor. Okay, so let's set this up. We got to override it. And this is where we do the work, essentially, of processing the event, sometimes based on the sender. This is where the monolithic part can really start, especially once you get a bunch of different components and stuff. This can be a lot of logic, but we're going to keep it really simple for now. Let's just say, okay, we got events. We know we got events. They're strings. So we can just do kind of an if else, well, just ifs, I guess. So we can say if event equals, we know some of the possible options: forward, land, rain, sun. We know this, we should know a little about the sender, but really all we know is that it is a base component. At this point, we would have to try to dynamically cast it to weather or airplane or some component to see if it's that, see if those casts fail or not. Typically though, you want to avoid dynamic casts in code just because they're slow, but if in a pinch you can't do it. We're going to kind of skip that for now. But the main thing is you want to be able to do some callbacks basically. All right, so let's say if the event is sun, for example, then we want to know that, I don't know, we would do something. Let's just make a cout right at the top, just to show what event we got in, received here. So event received, and then I'll just kind of put out what it is here. It's the string. It works nice in the console here. Now, I guess the event word is a keyword. I don't know. All right, so we can at least get that data in the console to know that we actually received the event. But then, based on what event you got, and maybe based on your testing of different dynamic casts, you can see what sent and what it sent and do all sorts of processing. We're going to kind of ignore this first thing for now, just to keep it a little simplified. But, if we get sun, for example, maybe we call comp2 here, or comp2 airplane comp, and we say, well, if there's sun, we can land. And that'll call this one here. And that will then notify the controller of land. So it would call this, it would do its thing, the component would do its thing, and if it needs to, it would re-notify of landing. But maybe there's more complicated logic in this landing. It's just an example. But for example, if we now have another event of landing, or was it land? It's just land. Okay. And we could say, I don't know, I'll just put some words here. Airplane is landing. And if we need to notify any other specific components, we could. I can't imagine how you would need to notify or do specific things to the weather. You don't necessarily have control of the weather, so maybe this weather part is a bad example. It might be better as just airplane 2, and we could probably work a little better with that, because then we could say, don't land airplane 2, one's already landing. But you get the point here. I'm going to kind of just leave it at that, I think. and we'll make some calls to this, and you can see it work. But you can see how you can kind of expand on this and get all sorts of logic going on between your different components. And you know, the main thing is you get this controller going, and as your components notify the controller can do whatever it needs to. I can imagine this would be pretty good for like game server stuff too, as different people connected to your server notify the server of different things happening. You might need to do other stuff in your world or put items on the ground or whatever it may be. So a very cool pattern. All right, let's go ahead and make it just a main down here, and let's go ahead and work with it a little bit. Make a quick example. So of course we need our components. Let's make our airplane component. Let's call it airplane, I guess, and we'll just make a new airplane, and we'll do one for the weather as well. And then of course we need our controller. Make sure I actually get this. There we go. And now we need our controller, which we've just called concrete controller. And the way we've set it up, we just need to pass in these two components, airplane and weather. There we go. Since they're already pointers, they should just pass right in, get all set up. And then as it calls this constructor, it should set the controllers up on those components. So very nice there. And then we can start calling stuff. So nothing will actually happen until we call a method. Like we'll call airplane. Let's call one that we know actually does something. Airplane landing. So we know that when we call airplane landing, it's going to notify the controller of land, which is going to go down here to land and say airplane is landing. Skip over the sun. And maybe we can also call another one just for sake of example. It's kind of a weird example, but hopefully it gets the point across for you guys. Maybe we call raining. All right, let's call sunshine first. Now sunshine, we don't have a statement for that to process it, so all we should see is event received sunshine. So that's fine. Sure, we could do like I was talking about earlier, we could put more info in here and, you know, test what components sent via dynamic cast based on all the possible components, et cetera. But, you know, and that might be fine. But if you do that a ton, we get some clunky code. But at least you could do cool stuff there. The option's there at least. It's better to have the option and for it to be slow than to just not have the option at all, I guess. But I love dynamic casts. I play around with them a lot, but be careful about overusing them. All right, then let's call weather raining. So when we call the sun one, we should get landing again. So we should get landing, then we should get sun and landing again, and then raining. That's what we should see based on this, based on how it's going to cascade. I don't know, maybe we'll just throw one more thing in here at the end, like this fly forward, just for the heck of it. Airplane, fly forward. All right, and now it is also assumed, oh, we got to make this right. Controller helps to create your variables correctly. Since these are all pointers, and as you can see, the concrete controller here, sure, it has pointer access, but it doesn't ever delete the pointers, which means it does not own the pointers. It's assumed that the client is going to manage their own stuff here. So basically what that means is when we're all done here, we got to be sure we delete them, since we do own them here in this main client code. We got to be sure to clean up after ourselves. Sure, we could just make them unique pointers, but that's going to turn into a mess of other code. For me, it's just more simple to do this real quick. All right, so let's go ahead and give this a run. Hit the play button here. Looks like we have some code errors somewhere. I've probably just forgot semicolons at the end of these classes. I tend to do that. Just one there, it looks like. Oh, I forgot to put the word concrete controller here again. That will cause an error. Just some little mistakes. Looks like we got it all sorted out. And as expected, it did what we thought. First thing we called was landing, and component set it. Then the event received land, airplane is landing. Then we said sun received, and we had that call. We had the sun call landing, so naturally it called it again because that's how we made it. Not that it makes any logical sense, but you know, sunshine is great for landing, probably better than rain. And we got the airplane's landing, and then we called the rain one, which is right here, and event received rain. That's all that one does. Fly forward, event received forward. So yeah, looks like it's working pretty good. But hopefully you understand this pattern and it works well for you. Super cool pattern. I love it, and something that I will probably use a lot going forward. I've used it something like it a little bit, but now that I've studied this pattern a little more, I'm really glad I did. Hope you feel the same. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching. Matt out. Peace.